Good evening, everyone. And that is our intro again. One moment. It's been a while, hasn't it? It's a beautiful song, but I think we've had enough for now. Okay, well, let's get the evening going. I am Campbell Morera, and this is The Invisible Night School. I am expecting my co-host Luis at any moment. He promised me that he was not going to leave me talking, rambling even for an hour before he arrived this time, but we'll see what happens. To begin, I would like to just mention, it's been a while. It was mid-August since the last time we had the show. It's a lot of things have happened. David Grusch obviously is a major feature of the discussion these days, and he's been causing a lot of news in the UFO world. It seemed like a good time to take a walk, take a stroll even, down through UFO town, the UFO lanes, boulevard even, and see what's going on. Today, I was looking over a few other things. Recently, I saw some stuff by Stephen Cambion. I was looking at some news articles, some pretty interesting things. I was pretty surprised to see that there's a bit of conflict in the UFO world. Something that stood out to me was James Lakatsky, a former DNI officer, and he also was the original person who ran the paranormal program that became what was mischaracterized in the news as the UFO program that Luis Elizondo ended up claiming responsibility for later. He has made statements suggesting that the people that David Grusch has spoken with are perhaps sincere in their beliefs, but they aren't necessarily saying things that are accurate. It was through Stephen Cambion's show that I saw that, and he was showing a clip from the show with the journalist. Oh my goodness, his name is slipping right now. Rolls Coulthard. Yeah, there you go. And he's saying that Grusch is going to come out and strenuously deny that. We'll see if that happens or not. And the funny thing about that was that Coulthard insisted that it would be with evidence that Grusch would show that the people he spoke to were sincere. That's an interesting thing to say, since you would expect that he would have provided that evidence initially. Why is it that he's now saying he'll provide evidence after a fellow UFO guy is saying that it doesn't add up? I mean, whatever, really. But it's also mixed together because Lakatsky and Colin Keller, a CIA guy, co-wrote the book, what is it, Secrets at the Skinwalker Ranch. And George Knapp, the investigative journalist who's been following UFO stuff for a long time, reported on a lot of things that are, to put it nicely, unverified. And, stuff like specifically just in the 90s, all that stuff around Area 51 and all of that, and the UFOs that are there, right? So, then George Knapp is got this podcast, and then Grusch has been getting promoted heavily on that podcast. So there's a bit of conflict there, and it's kind of unfortunate that that they're sort of. I mean, it's not unfortunate. It's unfortunate for them, but it's kind of entertaining that they're showing their hands so distinctly, so rapidly. I went onto Amazon today. I was looking up a bio of Lakatsky because I remembered some vague things about him, but I wanted to sort of more distinctly remember. I saw on Amazon their book has some absurd number, like over 2,000 reviews, 4.5 stars. They're making some good money off of that. If I recall correctly, it was independently published as well. So there is incentive financially for all these people to be doing this. Cambion, Stephen Cambion, he's got to show Truth Seekers. He's also talked about how he added up all the money from the monetized views and it's like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars through all of these different shows and things like that. So there's a lot of monetization occurring, and there's incentive for people to be spreading stories. The whole thing is quite messy. When David Grusch first came out with his allegations, and then he appeared in front of Congress and stuff, the stories, it was quite interesting. And, like most people who are interested in this subject, even though I have a skeptical perspective, I was excited to see something happening, because there's a lot of sort of gaps between these big reveals, and then ultimately the gap ends up sort of demonstrating that the big reveal was not credible, and or at least unfounded. So I would argue that we're kind of seeing that right now with Grusch. I also accept the counter argument that it hasn't really been long enough to fully assess everything, give him some time. That said, there's been so much going on with him, especially with stories he's telling in smaller media outlets and things like that, where it's just like you have to sort of shake your head. He has speculated that aliens are running the planet. He keeps on saying this biologics thing, and maybe that's true, but we don't have any evidence, and he doesn't apparently have direct evidence of that himself. He's been told things. We now have one of the UFO people, like in his sort of general sphere, saying that the people he's been talking to believe what they're saying, but he doesn't believe that that's accurate, what they're saying to him. We've got this weird thing where we've got Grusch going up to talk to Congress, and then when it's brought up to the Senator Gillibrand about, when are you going to talk to him next? She's saying that it's not happening yet because he wants his hotel and airfare and Uber Eats paid for, and now then that's being contested. But then it's like, what's going on here? We got the documentary that got produced by that YouTuber Jesse Michaels and his collaborator on that. I can't remember the guy's name right now, but like Grusch was spending like the week with them when he went to testify in Congress. It was alleged that Jesse Michaels paid for his airfare on that one. That's not, I actually don't know that 100%, but I've heard that somewhere. Maybe I shouldn't be repeating things I just hear randomly when I'm ripping into people for that exact thing. But anyway, the circumstance is a little strange if we sort of think about it abstractly. So this is the guy who is going to reveal what would be the biggest news in human history in some ways. I would argue strongly that would be like, not only are aliens here, are they doing all these things, but that the government has known about it. They have all this stuff, the crash retrievals, and they have the technology that can change the world and all this stuff, and they're keeping it secret. That would be like the biggest news ever, I think. And that's this guy coming out has his he was working a high level intelligence through the Air Force position, involved with the UFO program. So his background is good, but then it's all this other stuff, right? He retired early from it. And then it's sort of like a strange thing where he sort of had some issues personally, had a real estate agent license that sort of seemed to not go anywhere. And then he sort of comes forward and says like, oh, I'm going to change the world in a major way. And then he's sort of like, he's asking for, I'll only do that if I get like $500 for airfare and a hotel. It just doesn't really add up. In the Invisible Night School Discord the other day, I was saying sort of like, if these are actually the things that lead up to like disclosure of the biggest thing in the history of the world, then I'm going to personally have to take that as pretty much proof positive that we are living in a simulation that is being run by a sociopathic nihilist, because it is insane. I don't get it's just crazy. Like, it's like I would like, on some level, certainly, I mean, it's terrifying too, but it would be pretty neat for that kind of to be alive for something that groundbreaking. And yet, like, the things just don't add up. It's something like Lukatsky, the guy who's pointing out, like, oh, I think that the people Grusch is talking to are not saying things that are accurate, even if they believe them. He's the guy who talks about how he was followed home from the Skinwalker Ranch by, like, basically ghosts, like entities who then, like, were haunting him effectively, and, like, he was claiming he saw, like, dogs and a dog in a trench coat smoking a cigarette, and his neighbors got infected by the ghosts, and, like, so this is sort of like where he's coming from, and then he's saying that Grusch isn't not. It's like, once you start digging into it, it's really messy. And at the face level, it's like, oh, this high level former Air Force intel guy, he's saying a bunch of really interesting things, and he seems extremely credible. And then you get into it, and it's like so messy. And it's extremely hard to imagine that these are the conditions that would lead up to the biggest news in the history of the world. I'm just going to take a moment here and take a look at our chat. Who do we got here? Vancouver guy, Jeff Knox, obviously. Great to see you. Simon Fly, it's wonderful to see you. The Earth, Rachel, great to see you. Duncan, awesome. Who else we got here? I don't know who you are, but great to see you. Okay. Now, Luis has still not joined us. I am a little bit frustrated by that, because he's the one who messaged me to do this show. And then I specifically messaged him saying, are you going to be there? And he said, yes. And so, you know what? You can't count on anyone in this day and age. Can't count on Grusch. Can't count on Lukatsky. You can't count on our very own Luis Sayetano show up on time for the most, okay, I'm just going to stop there. A show about UFO stuff. God, so ridiculous. This freaking UFO subject, folks. I stepped away from it for a while there. Admittedly, I have a farm, and it got quite busy, and makes sense timeline wise with the harvest that I stepped away in mid-August. I'm happy to be sort of getting back into it. The information is not extremely exciting right now. It's sort of just like that's why I named the show what it is, like the Post-Grusch Clarity. It's kind of like the calm down after the big thing, the big reveal. Now Grusch has been repeatedly saying, 2024 is going to be big, 2024 is going to be big, 2024. And he's saying effectively that they're going to get some kind of statement out of the government. There are allegations that the new Speaker of the House, people don't know much about the guy. He has some very strong religious beliefs. He's very conservative. There are allegations that he's been saying that he's supporting getting to the bottom of the UFO subject. So there might actually be more hearings and things like that. It's interesting historically to take a look at that too. In the 60s, for example, there were mixed motives there. It was the hearings that Congress did in the 60s about UFOs. There was a mixture of things happening. Like, I'm sure that they sincerely wanted to know what was going on, but then also it led to people who were on those committees, who were leading those oversight panels, who were calling in witnesses, getting on TV, getting in the news and things like that. Those people raised their stature in public. And, it's like I mentioned before, like Gerald Ford was one of the prime people in there trying to get to the bottom of the UFO thing. And then he was selected for vice president by Richard Nixon. And then he ended up becoming president, not by popular vote, but when Nixon had to resign. But, you know, it's ridiculous. Duncan, wonder what Campbell farms. I farm CBD cannabis and butternut squash. Yes, weed farmer. Yeah, it is weed. It's like exactly the same as THC cannabis in every way, except it's been bred to only produce CBD, or at least produce like so little THC. It's under 0.3%. Usually you're smoking like, 15, 25%. Like, so I don't need a super intense license for that. I can actually operate under Health Canada's industrial hemp license regimen for that, even though it was designed for kinds of cannabis that were cultivated specifically for like fiber and grain historically. So I don't need all of the security that usually comes with a cannabis license. It's an effective way to operate with less investment to start up. It's a punishing industry, honestly. I'm not going to turn this into a cannabis show, but maybe I would have more to talk about based on what I'm saying right now about the UFO subject. But yeah, also butternut squash. That's maybe shocks people, but it's actually more profitable per square meter or square foot for you Americans. It's ridiculous. Anyway, yeah, so like the UFO subject, everybody here probably has heard my whole spiel about it over and over. I won't go on about it, but my overall sense of the UFO subject, I think it's a really interesting subject. I got into it. I stayed with it because I find it intriguing. I am very interested in history and military history. So the whole side of it with the intelligence agencies looking at it, the documented evidence that is available in the National Archives that has been verified, looked into, vetted thoroughly. Those things are really interesting. I really like being able to see what the agency's members, the people tasked with advising leadership about what they are assessing is actually happening, like what those leadership people were being provided to form their decision-making processes. To me, like, you get to sort of sit there and think like, if this appeared on my desk and I was the director of the CIA, what would I be thinking about that? And that's something I find really interesting. I also just when I found the one major report from the UK from 2000, like it's the equivalent of a report prepared by the CIA going over the past 30 years of all of the secret classified information they've collected on the UFO subject, collating it all, putting it all together into like whatever it is, 20-volume report, and then providing it to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And, that being a completely top secret document. And we have access to that through Freedom of Information. And that document is as recent as 2000. So, that type of thing where it's like, wow, this is like the top leadership was briefed on this, like, and this is what they think is actually happening. I think that's really cool. And I struggle to get other people to be as interested in that side of it as me, but that's what makes this fun, right? As everybody sort of brings their own perspective to the subject. Butternut squash, it's not. Well, I am thinking about it now. Okay, well, we do not have Luis yet, but I do see that backstage we have UFO historian Jeff Knox, and I will bring him on now because I would love to hear his input on a few of these things I've been mentioning. Jeff, how are you doing? Oh, you're muted. There you go.
Now,
how you doing?
Good.
Excellent. Yeah, I've watched a couple of the shows that you've three, I guess, produced so far. The UFO Detox Hour. Yeah, your content is always so interesting. Like, you're touching on a few of the cases that I've had the most interest in historically. Like, I think you most recently was it Leveland you did in the last one.
Yep.
That really interesting, right? Like those types of things are so cool to get into, right? Like it's like so many people see something, the story gets put together, and it becomes almost like a mythology or something at a certain point.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting about leveling is just the whole like so many people claim to see similar things, like these egg-shaped crafts. They all experience those, vehicle interferences, and the thing about the leveling flap is Martin Kottmeyer had messaged me on Facebook, and he had shown some charts of the various kind of UFO flaps that they have. And like leveling is a bit different than most UFO flaps because it happened in such a short period of time. It was such like this discrete window that all these sightings happened. Whereas a lot of other flaps, they kind of like the chart's more like like a bell kind of like shape. Whereas leveling is basically just like this point that pops up and then disappears again like after a couple of days. So it's a
Right.
interesting case.
It was like one day roughly, right? Like into the night, and then or even just one night, is that right?
Yeah, it was mostly November 2nd to 3rd, like the night of November 2nd to 3rd. And there was some, other sightings, a day or two before that or after that. But the main wave, most of the main popular sightings happened the night of the 2nd through the 3rd, basically. So
Yeah, it's wild. And I always find it very, like, especially intriguing when at face value, at least, all the different reports sound like so similar. It's like it feels like on some level it's like this, they saw something, like they're all discrete people who then witnessed something, and then they're coming together, and then you put it all together, and it's like, well, this person was way over here and they saw something, and this wasn't like when internet existed. So how could all these different people be saying that they saw something so similar?
yeah.
And then inevitably, when you get into the like line by line details, things start to get fuzzy the closer you zoom in. And that's sort of the way this subject really works so often, that the more you dig into the details, like the less clarity you get.
Yeah.
It's like I don't know, it's like a reverse microscope or something, I don't know.
Well, that's because I think a lot of the details kind of get like washed over to present like this like cohesive narrative to make it seem like it's all like it makes sense, and it's all logical, and so they skip over the details that don't really matter, or that they don't think matters, or that conflict with the narrative they're trying to sell. That's why, like I said a billion times, it's important to go back and dig into the original like material, like read those original newspaper clippings where they actually reported the stories for the first time. Read the original investigation files. Like if all you do is read the story as it's told in a book written in decades later or whatever, like you're going to miss really what went on. And you're going to get probably a not that accurate of like narrative of what went on in most UFO cases.
And it seems like a lot of the time, to me anyway, that a lot of these stories are motivated by good intent. Like the people telling them, they believe what they're saying, and they feel like to strengthen the story by omitting certain details, it it almost feels like they're sort of feeling that it does the story justice, or it like it's justified, the ends justify the means, basically. That since it did happen, it's fair to make it more compelling, because it's not fair that people aren't believing it since it's true. And I thought it was kind of interesting that Lakatsky was throwing some cold water onto the Grusch claims, because that the 30 people being, he talked to 30 people who are higher than him and have actually physically had their hands on the material. If I remember right, like Corbell like said it that way. He's like they had their hands on it. And it's like,
And that doesn't even seem accurate to me, right? Like,
yeah.
I can imagine maybe one or two people actually claiming they had their hands on the material, but like I think again, people are conflating like the word 40, that the 40 witnesses, with the idea that 40 witnesses somehow direct firsthand experience, where I don't think that's actually the case. Like, but it's hard to tell what they're really claiming, because the way they talk about the stuff is so like ambiguous and confusing, and they like to conflate words around, and like it's, yeah. And as you said, Grusch doesn't exactly give interviews to like people who ask any sort of real questions. Like he sticks to this like small crew of like close friends, like that can heavily monetize his appearance, like Jesse Michaels and Yes Theory, and Like, and he just won't talk to anyone that's willing to ask him hard questions, which is a bit ridiculous. Like I say, this is something that's gonna like change the world, this groundbreaking information, and this is how it comes out. Like a guy going on like dumb YouTube channels and like, yeah, that's yeah.
It would require us to reflect on like the nature of like how things are actually like brought forth into like public discourse. I mean, it already kind of does, but like it would really demand that if it turned out that 100% of everything that Grusch has alleged is true, it would be like,
Yeah.
well, okay, I guess. I mean, that's what's our worldview is completely annihilated, but I know that's kind of what's exciting about it for some people, right? Like I, for the first time, got like interested in this subject in like the depths of the virus, and that's not a mistake. That's not random chance. That's how the human brain works. Like, my farm, like I couldn't have any like volunteers or workers or anything. I was totally screwed for a couple of years, lost a lot of money. And that it's not a shock that that's when I like my brain, like like trauma and stuff, it opened up and was like, something's happening that's wrong, have to change trajectory, and then it's like, oh well, if aliens are actually here, like that's kind of funny, like that would be pretty hilarious, that like it is kind of all less relevant and things like that. So I sort of, when I see how Grusch operates and look at the trajectory of his life, where he sort of retired from the Air Force pretty early, that was a very high level thing, and then he sort of had multiple issues with a couple issues anyway with the police, long term, and then he seemingly didn't really get his real estate job off the ground. I see some parallels there in some ways, certainly, where it's like, I guess now he's like a international name. Like, I think he believes what he's saying. I don't think he's just screwing around, but like
I
it's
don't
like,
think he's lying. And that's that's what people argue about. It's like, what, he wouldn't lie to Congress. He could go to prison. I don't think most people are saying he's lying. Like, I think he believes what he's saying. I just don't think he's right about what he's saying. I think he's put too much trust in people that he knows that have told him stories, like a lot of people do, and he just accepted it kind of like as fact.
Yeah, and that's like, it's weird that that's like what Lukatsky's saying. And it kind of reminds me what you just said of, I don't know if anybody even knows who, I mean, I guess we probably do, but Bill O'Reilly, right? Like, F it, we'll do it live. And then it's like no one could sue him because he's crazy enough that he believes everything he says. So it's like, he doesn't have a sincere intent to cause harm. And it's like, well, that's an interesting little like catch-22, essentially. You can sort of if you power through it, you get to a stage where you can say whatever you want.
And
comes full circle almost.
And so many people, they just don't understand, like, there's a difference between echo timer off. Sorry, my food, I need to get in a second.
Okay, nice.
There's a difference between a lying and what you're saying being true or not, right? Like, what you can say can be absolutely false and just bogus, and it doesn't mean you're lying. It just means you believe what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like, and so many people on UFO Twitter don't seem to understand that distinction. Like, they think that either he's lying or he's telling the truth. Like, and it's not two options like that. It's not either you're lying or you're telling the truth. Like, you can be telling inaccurate information that's completely false and still believe it. And yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's an extremely important distinction, and I think it strengthens the well, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say, like, by denying that that's an option, people turn this into a lot more of a black or white thing, requiring nefarious intent. And when you require nefarious intent, it creates an extremely high standard required to reject the information, because typically people are not operating from like nefarious intent. It's relatively unusual. People generally believe that they're the hero in their own story. It's kind of crazy to
just like most people aren't actually hoaxing UFO sightings. They believe what they see. They're not like, trying to pull a scam on anyone, but they believe it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you got
I'm
your
gonna
food?
stop my cam for like 30 seconds so I go take that out of the oven. I'll be right back.
Yeah, sounds good. And let me check the comments here. Any hate crimes occurring? Not seeing anything. Oh, well, that's nice. Looking good. Thanks, Steve. That's very kind. Nice to see INS live streaming again. Yeah, it's been too long. I'm hoping we can get back into this. Shocked that Luis is not here yet, but maybe based on standards of evidence, we can now reasonably conclude that he will not be on time when he says he will be. Next time, I'll just schedule it an hour late, and then we'll guaranteed have him stay on the set. Yeah. So Jeff, I was curious, like what do you think is going on? Like the one thing that stood out to me so much in the last like couple weeks was Lukatsky throwing, cold water on Grusch's claims. Why do you think Lukatsky would do that?
Yeah, that's actually, I don't make a habit of listening to Corbell's little podcast, but that's actually one of the episodes I actually listened to. And that whole episode was kind of interesting. The way that like Corbell kept trying to get this answer out of him, like that he wanted, and like Lukatsky keeps like resisting, like, you're putting words in my mouth. It's not exactly what I'm saying. But as far as Grusch, it's like, I wonder if there's potentially, maybe there's a little bit of jealousy for attention. Like those guys got their own books coming out. They've got that just came out. They had their first book that they did.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they feel like Grusch is taking the attention away. I don't know. I think he's probably right.
Yeah. Well, that's the interesting part, isn't it? It's like it makes me wonder so deeply because, like, as we know, so many of the most prominent figures in this UFO disclosure community are former intel people.
Yeah.
I mean, you can just go down the whole list, and it's most of them, like almost like a big number of them. And once again, it's like on the other side of it, it's like, well, yeah, of course it's intel people because they're the ones who were inside the building. They're the ones who know. So it's like, yeah, but then it's also like we know from Freedom of Information Access documents just detailing the government's internal policies about this stuff, that like the UFO subject has been identified as a how is it framed, like as sort of like in the sphere of like white nationalism and things, as like a threat to national security in some way.
Yeah.
And it's not really surprising. I mean, it is surprising when you think about like the reality of the individuals, because obviously I would not characterize the average UFO community member as being equivalent to white nationalism. But I mean, at the same time, there is some overlap. And then also like the whole thing around, let's get into the government's deepest secrets, let's dig them out, and let's publish them. Like, it makes sense that the government sees like concerted efforts to get at their deepest secrets as like a conceptual national security threat.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, what? It's like, see.
Yeah, like I said, there certainly is like quite a bit of crossover between the UFO community and like also the ancient aliens community, if you kind of consider that part of the UFO community in a sense.
Yeah.
And like white nationalism, just the alt-right and stuff in general. And while it may not be like direct, UFOs definitely can act as like a gateway, kind of like a gateway drug into some of those more like extreme kind of like topics. Like once you start going down like these conspiracy rabbit holes with UFOs, like people might start like questioning all sorts of things, like questioning all the powers that be, all the choices they made. They start to listen to like all these fringe alternative like sources of media that start to sell them all these other sort of conspiracies. And that's kind of actually how a lot of like these like disinformation, misinformation, and like propaganda kind of like networks work, like even back in like the 2016 election, is how they would work is they would get in some other group, something unrelated from politics. Like they'd start a Facebook group about like dogs or something, right? And like they would get a community and they make all these people feel like part of a community, and then they slowly push them towards more extreme stuff with like their voting. They'll bring up like vaccines, or the bad immigrants crossing the border, or whatever crazy idea they want to like try and sell. And they use these communities to push people towards more extreme and fringe like communities. And yeah, it's and even with the new Aero director that was announced today, a lot of people were like, "Oh, great, another intelligence community guy," right? Like, because he was from the National Geointelligence Center or something, Information Center, one of the yeah. And it's like, well, I mean, yeah, but again, to an extent, like, who else are we gonna have do that job? Like, it's gonna be somebody in the government that probably is in the defense and intelligence community, like, you're going to pull somebody that's never been involved with like that kind of stuff to run Arrow. So, I mean, a lot of people are like already decided that it's just another cover up. They got another intel guy in. He's just going to lie to all of us. And without him even having done his job yet, he's like not even on the job a day. And they're already decided he's an intel cover up agent,
Yeah, well, what other option is there, really?
Yeah.
That's something that I didn't even think to mention. That today it was Kirkpatrick has like stepped aside, and they named a new. I didn't see that they had named a new person yet, though.
Yeah, it's something Phillips, Timothy.
Okay.
Phillips, I want to say, and he was like the director of the Geo National Intelligence Center or something like that.
Right.
Human Center, yeah.
And the former director, Kirkpatrick, like he was getting so much flack for like months and months there. Like, and then in the most recent like month or two, there were these direct confrontations between him and Grusch, like repeatedly, where he was saying one thing and then David Grusch was saying another. And then it was just a heads butting. Like, for example, the first thing or one thing that comes to mind was the thing about whether David Grusch had been invited to provide testimony to Arrow. And Kirkpatrick said that they had sent him like 4 or 5 requests to appear. Grusch said he never got a notice. In the community, then people are sort of saying like, "Oh, it's just a miscommunication." Like, what was it, Grusch probably didn't set up a mail forwarding.
It's in a spam box. Yeah.
So, like, it's like maybe, but then there's always like a little bit of a thing there. But then I felt like these miscommunications were being emphasized pretty heavily within the UFO community to paint Kirkpatrick in an especially negative light. Not surprising, I suppose, given that he has consistently been saying no evidence of extraterrestrials. That's not what people want to hear. Well, I thought it was sorry, yeah.
If somebody, they'll be happy with the choice if the guy tells them what they want to hear, right? So, like, even with this new appointment, I saw comments from people today, and they're like, how long do you think before the UFO Twitter community turns on him? And some other guys like, well, it just kind of depends. Is he going to be like pragmatic and like scientific like Kirkpatrick was? Or is he going to like cave and tell everybody what they want to hear? Like, I doubt he's going to tell people what they want to hear. So, it's only a matter of time before they turn on the new guy.
Yeah, no question. Like, all he has to do is like present his first like report, right? And then it's game over. The
second he says there's no evidence, we have not seen evidence of extraterrestrial craft, like, everyone's going to turn on them. So
that's something that I know you as a historian are familiar with as well. But like, going back to the very earliest days with the US Air Force, they have said basically that statement, like, when they're pushed to the final stage of what they're being asked, like, typically they don't want to be sort of explicitly defining what it is or isn't. But then when it gets down to it, they'll say something like, there is no evidence of extraterrestrials. And that's something that, goes back to like the 60s, the 50s. And it doesn't.
Like the Sanford press conference in 1952, like, they'll admit the UFO phenomenon is real. People see things they cannot like explain, but they've got no evidence that it's, extraterrestrial craft. Like, they've been saying this all along.
Yeah. Yes. And something that I find especially interesting about that, given my own interest in the historical internal documents, is that, and like, however you want to say it, God only knows if it's true or not, but like it's quite clear from the historical documentation that at the US Air Force, at the CIA, at the UK's Ministry of Defense, these agencies have internally at various times concluded that UFO phenomena, like as a discrete kind of phenomenon that has a set of features and all of this stuff, do exist, and if they do exist, represent some kind of natural phenomenon, and it depends on how they define that in those documents. But that's been sort of the conclusion in these agencies historically. That's what we've seen in the record formally. Like, there's no argument about that. I mean, it's like, I was thinking about it. It's like if somebody was like, yeah, the UK's leadership hasn't been briefed that UFOs are real and are a discrete kind of object that have the features consistently reported by people like J. Allen Hynek, described in his book. It would be like, I could easily double my money. I could be like, I bet my farm that that's a fact, like it's like it is a fact historically that they have internally concluded that these objects exist and are ball lightning. That does not mean that that is true, but it does mean that they have internally concluded that in these agents, at least conclusively at the UK Ministry of Defense, and have briefed their leadership on that. Now, like, if we parse that out, we're seeing, like, it's like by saying like no evidence of extraterrestrials, you kind of leave the option, like, the fundamental phenomenon, if you want to call it a phenomenon instead of various phenomena, like if that actually exists but is not extraterrestrial, it's just a natural phenomenon, like meteors historically.
Yep.
Like it's like it's almost everything could be true. Like recently it was a retired colonel, I don't remember his name, but he came out. He was saying, because he worked with Grusch, I believe, originally when Grusch was working on this UFO file, and this retired colonel, he was quoted on Stephen Cambion, and Cambion's usually quite good with being accurate, at least about quoting people. This guy was saying, fundamentally, the basics of what David Grusch is saying in terms of technology, they're trying to reverse engineer it from an unknown source for the last 70, 80 years. Fundamentally, that is a correct narrative. That's not inconsistent. Like, that could be true, and it could not be extraterrestrials. I feel like if that actually was what finally came out after years and years and years, it's like the T.S. Eliot poem, right? It's like not a bang but a whimper. Like, people are just gonna be like, whatever.
And that's the funny thing, because so many of these people like try and act like we're not saying it's extraterrestrial, we're not saying it's alien. Like they pretend like they would be happy with just any sort of solution, like a discovery of a new natural phenomenon, or that all of this really was just about like government abuses and illegal spending, and that out of this we got that exposed, but we didn't get UFOs or aliens, and that they would be happy with that. I'm sorry, I call BS on that, because let's be honest here, people aren't looking for that. They want to hear that there's extraterrestrial life or whatever coming here. And when I say alien, I don't necessarily just mean like ETs, like really alien, anything not here, like whether you're like into ultra terrestrials, interdimensional space poltergeist, or whatever your whole deal is, like I kind of just include all of that in alien, ET, like whatever.
Yeah.
The point is like that's the answer they're looking for. Like, they're not looking for a natural phenomenon, and people are going to be very disappointed if that's what comes out to be. But, and like you said, through the history, like a lot of people concluded that there's definitely something going on, but that they think it could just be undiscovered natural phenomenon that they have not figured out. And we've discovered all sorts of things like sprites, like all sorts of things in the sky that like we just didn't know about 50, 60 years ago. As far as like ball lightning, that's actually how they explain some of the leveling cases. A couple of them they explained as Venus, but the vast majority of like the vehicle interference cases, they explained away as ball lightning. Now, I'm not saying that's what actually happened, that's actually responsible, but that is in fact how they explained it away back then.
Which is pretty remarkable. Like, that's something that I noted again and again in the U.S. Air Force Blue Book files that have been released, is that when there is a case where the investigators determined that, depends on how you want to put it, but it's more likely than not, based on the number of observers, the credibility of the observers, the sensors that were used to observe the thing in question, that like when they have determined that an object with the classic features of a UFO have been observed, it is more likely than not to have been ball lightning if that object with those features was observed. But even today, in peer-reviewed, publicly available science papers, there is no verification that ball lightning has those features. We do not have any kind of verification that ball lightning, like the Ministry of Defense report claims, is capable of, electromagnetically coupling and then orbiting, causing electromagnetic interference. All of these things that are alleged in these internal reports. We don't have any evidence in the public realm that those are features of ball lightning. So it's interesting how it's a bit of a gray area where those reports, like those documents, are just not being referenced at all. Yeah. We do have papers verifying ball lightning exists, but not that it has these features. And the government is largely not sort of addressing it directly. And then you look into the reports and they're like, we're trying to figure out how ball lightning has these features because we're trying to weaponize it and figure it out before the Russians do. And, obviously it's Chinese now, but this is like 2000 before that.
Yeah.
So then it's like on paper, we have historic, like the documented evidence that that is the conspiracy essentially that has been promoted historically, like that technology is being reverse engineered from an unknown source, and that it could have all of these different things that could fundamentally alter the way society functions, because it's how the containment mechanism of the ball lightning, it can create like fusion power, and then you have whatever you call like 0 point energy or like whatever the hell they're calling it. And it's like, how often is there like a tiny grain of like actual truth at the heart of just like a mountain of bullshit?
Yeah. I mean, that's even the truth with things like mythology and legends. Like most of it's probably bullshit, but there's a grain of truth behind a lot of stuff, and it just kind of gets built up. The interesting about like ball lightning is, I believe I shared a video last year sometime where they were going over all these anecdotal reports of like ball lightning, and like that video, you could have just swapped out ball lightning and UFO and it would have been the same lecture essentially, because all the sightings had basically the same kind of criteria. They described them moving around intelligently. Like they talked about World War II sightings where like these like balls of light like would come through the walls of the plane, seem to like go around the plane, like go through the instrumentation and then like fly out the window and like leave again. Like, and people describe them as like these intelligently controlled objects. And there's a lot of overlap. And I always found it interesting, like just kind of depending on what your kind of worldview is how you kind of determine how you explain a weird sighting like that, right? Like if you didn't know about UFOs back then, you'd explain it as ball lightning. And so those got labeled as ball lightning. Had those events happen now, like those same pilots might call it like a UAP event or whatever, Had they happened, 150 years ago, they might have called them fairy lights or, whatever, So it's
I know I would have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like so there's always probably been these like natural phenomenons causing these, being kind of like the instigator of these like sighting reports that people have. And just kind of depending on, what your knowledge base is, what your worldview is, what time period you grew up, kind of will determine how you explain that sighting. So it's ball lightning is, it's and like UFOs, it's anecdotal. It's rare. It's something that you don't see very often. So it's hard to set up some sort of instrumented approach to like monitor for it and to get real good data off of it. Short of, like you said, creating it in a lab and then trying to get it to do these things that have been attributed to it, which you may or may not be able to do. It's maybe one day, but even if we do discover some sightings actually are ball lightning or some other natural event, that still probably won't explain everything, you know, because like I said, UFOs are not one thing. Like the UFO phenomenon is many things. There's many things that cause UFO reports. And so in a way, it'll never be solved. There'll never be an answer to the UFO mystery because people will always see things they can't explain. And those things will have a variety of causes behind them.
Yeah, well, and you're absolutely right because what you're saying is bringing to mind the paper by Jacques Vallée and Eric Davis. It was Incommensurability, High Strangeness, and yada yada. And in that paper, they specifically talk about how UFOs often resemble these natural phenomena like meteors and things like that, and that, like, you know, they're inside the ionized shell, and it's you're just seeing kind of the appearance of the natural phenomenon, but like the UFOs inside that, right? So they already have, they're already prepared for that 100%.
That's
Even
not a
on,
cloud. That's a cloaking device on a UFO that makes it look like a cloud.
yeah, so like, you know, it's like anything's possible. Like you can just sort of say anything, you're right. So it's never gonna go away. I mean, um God, who
There's an
Stan,
interest in not solving mysteries either, you know,
yeah.
like mysteries is what keeps people around, you know, like, and there's so many people on your Twitter, they'll outright admit they don't want the mystery solved. Like that would be the end of the fun, you know, to them. You know, so many people are like, oh, we're just looking for answers. A lot of people really aren't looking for answers. They want the mystery. The mystery is why they're in it, you know.
That's why I got interested. Honestly, I was like, originally when I started looking at it, I saw like all. I was just reading, like, first of all, it was like the New York Times videos. I was like, that looks weird. I wonder what the heck that is. Why are those pilots so surprised? And then after the fact, like now I understand, like, you know, pilots are not actually considered especially reliable eyewitnesses.
Yeah.
They make mistakes all the time. Like how many people are in the air piloting something right now? Like 100,000? Like, I don't, like, a huge number. Like, how many planes are in the sky right now, right?
I don't know. I mean, I think like there's at least just like over the US alone, like 8,000 or more flights at any given time, if not more.
Yeah,
But
so
I mean,
like,
it's a massive amount of flights up there.
and
And
it's
there's
like,
just so many pilot UFO cases that have turned out to be completely like prosaic just recently.
yeah,
Like how many pilots have reported Starlink and thought that they were everything from mile-long motherships to, you know, moving around crazily, like when we know it is Starlink. Like pilots make mistakes. Like
yeah,
it happens, you know, like and they get disoriented. Like I was just discussing the Frederick Valentic case, you know, in New Zealand,
yes,
where
the
he went over
orbiting.
this plane, and like I'm pretty positive he got spatial disorientation. He probably ended up flying upside down. The light he saw was just a reflection off the water of his own plane, and he flew into the ground, which happens when you're flying over featureless surfaces with basically just like a horizon with no land masses or anything you can see. You get disoriented and you flip around.
Yeah, he
And this
wasn't
is not
super
just,
experienced.
yeah, he was not super experienced.
He
He
was
just wasn't
talking about being
bored.
afraid of a UFO confronting him while he was flying in advance of taking the flight, so he was prepared psychologically to expect that.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
people will argue like, well, he wasn't like a highly trained top of the top gun, you know, military pilot. Like those guys, they can't make mistakes. Well, that's just patently false as well, because I've actually shared presentations from Navy, like Lieutenant Commander Navy Top Gun fighter pilots, on exactly how many incidents of spatial disorientation, how it's extremely common, and how it's actually the leading cause of like death and aircraft accidents in like the Navy and the Air Force, is
Right.
pilots getting spatially disoriented or experiencing other various illusions that they experience while flying and getting into accidents. Like, so it happens. It doesn't matter how much training you got, like, or how fancy your plane system is, or what avionics you got. Like, pilots can make mistakes. Like, we're all just human. Like, we're all susceptible to this stuff. and you can't really train it away either. Like, and certain type of illusions and certain types of spatial disorientation, the more experience you have can lessen the effects of it. But even still, like, it's minimal how much you can actually train for that stuff. And the fact is, they just don't really train for that stuff. Like, I've looked at like the training for like the Navy, like fighter pilots and whatnot, and like they have to go through like a very basic, like short, like, it's like I don't want to throw out a number because I'll probably be wrong, but it's just not much. They don't have to do much spatial disorientation training at all. Like, it's just, yeah.
I guess the computer maybe does a fair, like their systems probably provide a lot of support these days to ensure that they don't fly. What the hell are the like $1 billion airplane into the ground? Like, my God,
like F-35. Yeah.
If we presume, go on.
I was going to say, that's what David Fravor himself said, and I believe his interview to Joe Rogan. He's like as pilots, we can't trust our own eyes and our like kind of our own brains. Like, that's why we have these sensors and avionics, because like our bodies are experiencing things, and that's why we've got to trust our instruments to know where we're flying, how we're flying. Like, I don't think you could really effectively fly those fancy planes without those fancy avionic systems, and like, yeah,
it looks like an absolute nightmare in those cockpits. Like, I don't understand how humans are. I feel like that's like approaching like the limit of human capacity in some ways, like these super advanced planes. Like, it's like stunning.
Big old flat screens like in them. Like, I think like the F-35's got like this big, massive, like,
it's like an iPad.
Yeah, it's like a massive like touch panel. And,
I don't know if I like that.
Flying, and you've got the kind of overlay vision on your eyes at the same time. It's like, I don't know how you're like working all that stuff at the exact same time. And then you see these guys that like fighter pilots that go up and they record stuff for YouTube. So they've got the GoPro going. They're basically doing a YouTube video while they're doing like practice dogfights like in their planes. Like, I mean, this is a remarkable amount of like multitasking they've got going on. That's very impressive, but that also is like a curse in its own way, because you kind of get this information overload. They've got so much going on, they lose track of doing something else. And this happens with commercial pilots as well. Like, they'll get overloaded with the tasks they have to do. They'll miss like a warning light that's been on for like an hour and crash a plane because they're just so focused on whatever else they're doing. It's
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, some of the most famous photos of the UFOs from the cockpits of the fighter jets I recall, were taken by the pilots, like iPhones or whatever, like smartphones.
Yeah.
Like, they're like holding them while they're, like you're saying, like they're flying and like snapping this photo.
Yeah.
It's like, what? Because they don't have optical sensors, I guess, on the plane, but it's like, what in the... It's just ridiculous.
Or maybe it would be harder to get images off the actual plane, but if
yes,
they can just,
they can just have that themselves. Yeah, that's a good point.
It amazes me how quickly they can get some stuff cleared. Like those guys that make YouTube videos, like some of them, they can get their little GoPro videos cleared by whoever they need to get them cleared by to put on like YouTube within like days of them flying. Yet we can't get pictures of balloons they take with their cell phones, until Arrow decides to release them in a congressional hearing.
Right. So, yeah. And it does always end up like raising more questions, right?
Yeah.
And also, it was reminding me just now of Ryan Graves, right? He has taken a pretty major role in this whole thing. He's got the Airplane Safety Association that he's doing. He's like testified in front of Congress. And
with
then
6-hand stories that he heard from someone else, from someone else, from someone else, from someone else. It
gets messy, because he originally, I recall, like he said historically, like, I haven't like personally seen a UFO, but then it's sort of changed now where he's talked about how he has seen a UFO, but it was on his sensor panel.
Yeah.
And the sensor panel was showing him he was saying a concentration of energy that was not visible optically, but the sensors were picking it up. And that was his statement. And I find that pretty intriguing, because that's exactly what the UK Ministry of Defence reports. One of the possible features of these atmospheric electromagnetic phenomena, that depending on the ionization level, like the amount of energy, it can either be radar reflective but invisible optically. It can be non-radar reflective and visible optically, or it can be both radar reflective and visible, and it all just depends on like how the ions are being charged and things like that. So like it's so weird to me to see, so without them knowing it, that they're sort of like commenting in a way that seems to indicate there's something around this whole, you know, historic internal report thing. Not to mention that Grusch himself, I was so floored by this with his feature with Ross Coulthard on News Nation. He's being asked by Coulthard about the most famous Navy video, and it's you know, the whatever it is, the gimbal or whatever it is, and then Coulthard's like, oh, you know, some people are saying it's a plane, and you know, obviously Mick Westey's talking about. And then Grush's response is, it's definitely not a plane. And then he says, we got it investigated internally, and our internal analysts determined that it may be some kind of unusual natural phenomenon, but certainly not a plane. And it's like, why would he say that about the most famous video that has convinced so many people to look at this, unless, you know, that's an accurate statement? Not that their assessment is necessarily accurate, but that was the conclusion they came to.
No, and I thought that it was either Arrow or somebody else came up to did some math and kind of figured out that the object was supposed to be like 13 miles away from the actual plane.
Yeah, Mick West, like, this is the thing, I know Mick
did, but I think the government itself came up to that same conclusion.
Oh yeah, right. They like basically like used his exact model because it's good. It was accurate.
Yeah,
it could be a distant plane that was misidentified as being closer than it is. Under the conditions where it could be a distant plane that was misidentified, the odds dramatically skyrocket to that being almost certainly statistically what it was. It would be my argument. Like, you know, we don't have proof positive that ball lightning looks like that. Like, we don't have any
the interesting thing about like the gimbal sighting is like, so this took place off, you know, the coast of what was it, like South Carolina, Florida, like it was East Coast, right? Like, and they do get like all sorts of crazy like electrical storms there. Like, in fact, it's not even the first like kind of paranormal and UFO stories. Like, there's a guy, David Perez, I don't know if you know who he is. Like, he basically was working on a warp drive in his garage. Like, he was this professor guy, like that, using a theory because of a plane that was flying up from like, I think like the Bahamas or something along the East Coast that supposedly went in like so far in a time period that was impossible, because he thinks they flew into this massive electrical storm, and he thinks that somehow warped space, you know, and made the plane go from one location to another, and that's how they got there in like this short period of time. And so he spent like the last, you know, like 20 years or something trying to reverse engineer like this electrical storm phenomenon and how it can warp space time. And
okay,
I'm thinking that like there's a lot of electrical storms that happen off like the East Coast, like particularly when you get more southern, like off the East Coast, that you know, that can cause things to pop up like on radar. Like even storms, just storms in general. Like if you ever watch like the weather station or the news, like that stuff gets picked up on radar. It even gets picked up on military radar that is like looking for planes and stuff. Like they see these like things just like flying like across the, but it's just the storm. It's like electromagnetic like energy like in a storm that causes it. So it's interesting that they say that you know, the gimbal, Grace was saying that, you know, it's just like this electrical energy that popped up. Like that could be so many things, but like I say, it could also just be a distant plane. That's probably answer to me. And the thing about both the videos, the Graves video or the gimbal video, and like the TikTok video, TikTok,
it is on TikTok.
Video, the TikTok TikTok video is that even those videos just aren't remarkable in itself. Like there's nothing you're going to get out of those videos that's going to prove like your theory like definitively as to what you think it is. Like they're pretty unremarkable videos. Like, but you've got people that have spent the last 5 years like manipulating the hell out of them, like to try and prove like that is some sort of anomalous like object. But even if that's the case, the videos don't show any of that. The videos don't
Mhm.
show remarkable movements. They don't show amazing speeds. They don't show it doing any of these characteristics they talk about. And the videos all we see is, like a splotch, just like not doing much of anything. Like in
Yeah.
the Tic Tac video, it's just like there, and then they lose the zoom track, and so it goes off. And some people say, "Oh, that's it speeding off." It's not. That's not actually the object speed. That's the zoom tracking losing. Like it zoomed off screen because the tracking got lost. Like it's not the speed of the object moving away.
Yes, and that's been pretty strongly established. But it's like because it doesn't do anything remarkable, it's like you need to grasp it the most the possible, right? It's like with the
Yeah,
it's rotating. It's like, well, it actually, yeah, something was rotating, but like the gimbal system was probably the thing rotating.
yeah,
And that was pretty convincingly demonstrated by Mick West as well. So like once it's established, I mean, once it's established that there is a plausible explanation, distant plane, the rotating system, then that inevitably, even if I 100% accept, oh, ball lightning does exist with all of these phenomena, with all of these characteristics, it is far less likely that those things would be that than something that we know conclusively does exist with the features that are presented on the video. And it's
yeah,
like the emotion of the pilots, I think, is maybe the most like compelling. And it's not compelling in terms of verifying that what's being observed is like accurate to what people are saying that it is, but it's like it's the most it's the thing that latches into your brain and is like, these guys, like, they look at things all the time, and like, they're getting freaked out by it. And then you step back and it's like, oh, they were being trained on that video system. Like that was a brand new system. Like they wouldn't necessarily have recognized that it would be rotating like that to maintain the stability of the image and things like that.
yeah. Because as fighter pilots, like they're not, at flare pod engineers. Like that's like they're trained to use the system, but like I doubt many of them have deep knowledge of like how it works or why that would be rotating like that. And this is why, like, it's like you got to use like the law of parsimony, or like Occam's razor. Like if there's a possible explanation, something that we know exists that can fit like what we have, the data that we have, the information that we have, like that's a much more likely option than having to invent some new thing like an extraterrestrial spacecraft visiting us that's actually doing that. But so
Yeah.
many people, they don't take that approach. They work backwards. They assume it's an extraterrestrial spacecraft and dare you to prove them otherwise. And it's like, well, I mean, you can't do. How can I prove to you it's not an extraterrestrial spacecraft?
Yeah.
But it is most likely not, because there's other explanations that work that are understood that we know about. So
Yeah, we know exist. Yeah, so
yeah,
let's like, it's just necessary. Okay, even if I think that the Nimitz Tic Tac was some kind of electromagnetic phenomenon, even if I think that, there is no point in, if I'm trying to move forward on this thing, to take that and like project it forward, because I can't demonstrate that in any way. And like, if you can't demonstrate it and there are sufficient plausible alternatives that we know conclusively exist, it is necessarily the case that that is more likely. And it's like, this is something I've tried to argue with people, like, in a, I'm trying to be like steel manning almost, where I'm trying to like convince people, like on Reddit and things, hopeless task, but
yeah,
being like, listen, like, if I'm 100% with you on this, you're using a case that does not have the content necessary to overcome the evidence, burden. You are weakening your position by not like going to things that at least like don't have a plausible alternative explanation. And like there's something in that that just cannot be accepted. It's like, instantaneously it's like, you don't believe the pilots, this and this and that, and it's like, it doesn't matter what I think. I'm
yeah.
nobody.
It's not
Like,
about me. Yeah,
yeah, we're trying, like, if I'm trying to support you, conceptually in like moving this subject forward, actually like getting somewhere with it, and you can't even like come to the best evidence available. Like, what are you doing? It's like, okay, why do you think, Jeff, knowing so much about UFO history as you do, why in the name of God did David Grusch lead with the freaking Mussolini UFO thing?
Uh, I
Why?
I think because he was told it by his close friends, and again, he trusted them. Like
Right.
I don't think he really has done a whole lot of like research into this besides for what he's been told by people. And when it comes to the ridiculous 1933 Italy story, I think he was told it by Luis Elizondo and maybe even Mellon, because they heard it from the guys in Italy. But it's like, had he done any basic research into it, you would hope he would have been able to figure out it was garbage. But so many people, like, you try and explain this and like, well, it's not debunked. Maybe Grush has secret government documents we don't know about. Like, so you're inventing something that may or may not exist, like to try and continue to support a case that is quite clearly like garbage. Like, it's really disappointing too, because again, it'd be hilarious if anything Grush said turned out to be true, and he still promoted like these utter garbage like cases like Italy. Like
Yeah.
that's a really, even the people that are kind of supporters of Grush, I've had quite a few people say that case and him supporting it is kind of like it's a red flag, but they still believe everything else Grush tells them.
Yeah.
It just shows you how when people have the will to believe, they'll dismiss anything, when what it should show you is that either Grush puts too much faith in people close to him, or he's not a very good investigator. He's just not able to critically look at and investigate cases. And either way, it's not, it's not good. So it's yeah, that case it's not the first time that case was presented in a TV show briefly in 2013, I believe, but I don't think they really mentioned the Mussolini 1933 Italy stuff. They mostly covered the 1936 case that was also like kind of talked about, but
Okay.
it's almost certain that he got it from like Elizondo. Like, I would bet money, if I was a betting person, he learned it from Elizondo, who learned it from Pinotti in 2018 when he was there. And lo and behold, the conference Grush just did, I believe, in what was it, like the last week or two or something, or
No, I'm not familiar.
it is with Pinotti and Lasoni, the guys that promoted that hoax. Like,
Oh, wow.
it's
Okay.
the one UFO conference he's chosen to do, and it's being ran by Pinotti and like Lasoni. So
Right, and that's like the one case that he was kind of leaning on. That definitely doesn't look good.
yeah, you would think he would have been able to at least backtrack from that, like maybe say like, well, maybe I don't know about that one. Like, that would have bought him some credibility maybe, but doubling down by going to a conference ran by the guys and I guess he did
That's
it
bad.
like over Zoom. I think I saw a screenshot of it. Like, I think he did his appearance over Zoom. He didn't actually go to
God.
Italy, but it was in like San Marino.
Well, they were paying his airfare and Uber Eats.
Yeah, they must not have offered to pay. So
Yeah, where's Jesse Michaels when you need him, right?
exactly. So
Yeah. And what okay, so another thing with David Grush, I just want to mention briefly because we're talking about his connections with people. Okay, Dr. Gary Nolan, obviously a problematic figure in some respects, unquestionably. At the same time, a very, very well respected Stanford epidemiologist. He's doing amazing work on attempting to cure cancer. That said, he has personal interests relating to UFOs. He's talked explicitly, I believe it was on Theories of Everything. He was talking about how, he essentially like hears voices and he attributes those voices, as well as close family members experience the same thing, to interdimensional beings that also are UFOs. And so like he has a belief system around his personal internal experience is tied to this external subject. And then you see that uh, the only sort of like employment formally that we see Grusch has currently is as the chief operating officer of a company that Dr. Gary Nolan founded called like the Soul Corporation, Sol
Soul
Corporation.
Foundation.
Yeah, Foundation. Okay, yeah, and then
they've got a conference coming up.
oh, they do. Okay, because I was wondering, have you seen that connection and what? Like, I'm just curious, like, what you kind of make of that, like, especially somebody who's seen the history of people coming forward and like being associated with previous figures in the community and things like that. Like, what do you think of him being like the COO of a company or a corporation or whatever it is founded by Nolan?
Yeah, that's the thing. Like all these people seem to all be connected together. It's like a small circle of people,
Yeah,
because of course Nolan's connected to, like Elizondo and I'll put
it's
off
almost a clown car, if you will.
Green and like all these other guys, right? And Nolan, and it's just a good example of how even people that are like highly credentialed and are smart guys that do, perhaps in their career have done, good work, can have personal belief systems that are kind of like out there. Doesn't Nolan also say that he's been abducted or like he believes he has like childhood memories of being abducted or something?
I
Like,
haven't heard that, but I would not be surprised.
yeah. So and the Soul Foundation is basically all these disclosure guys, right? Like it's the same people that, before Grusch, like are still like involved. Like at their inaugural conference, you have Leslie Keene, Luis Elizondo, Hal Puthoff, and you've got this Larry McGuire, that's the member of parliament up there in Canada that,
Oh yeah, it's like from
Jeremy
Saskatchewan
Corbell
or something. Yeah,
or whatever. Yeah.
right.
And so like it's all these guys, like, and they all know each other. And of course, we know Eric Davis, knew Grusch apparently going back to like 2015 or something, like,
Yeah. Okay.
Elizondo claimed to know and mentor Grusch, for years. Like all these guys have claimed to know each other for like years, and they're all connected, and they've all got their new companies now or their new foundations now, and it's now is Grusch still the COO, or I thought they maybe downgraded that a bit.
Did they?
Like,
Maybe.
yeah, I think they may have downgraded that.
Yeah, he didn't
But
didn't make the cut fully.
it's all these guys. It's like they're getting in and they're getting their money. So
Yeah, and I mean, like, I honestly, I personally, anyway, I don't think that most of them, maybe some are acting nefariously. I think most of these guys like sincerely believe it.
yeah,
Very
absolutely.
yeah, like right, similar to like sort of fundamentalists like of various religious sects and things like that. Like they are building mega churches, they are taking people's money, they are encouraging people to give them all of their money. They still personally believe that it's like being given to them as like reward from God. Like so it's like their beliefs are true, and it makes it so much harder for people to reject what they're saying when there is that fundamental sense that they are being sincere.
Yeah,
And it's like we started with right, that like if someone's being sincere, then they can't be wrong. And it's like
yeah.
I don't know about that.
Well,
I mean, I knew it's wrong.
somebody this week on Twitter asked, like, what's a grifter? Like, what makes somebody a grifter, right? Like, and part of the discussion, something I said was like, some of it has to kind of do with like your intent. Like, if you're not like intentionally deceiving people, you're just like a gullible like soul that's kind of credulous and believes all sorts of stuff. Like, maybe you're not a grifter per se. You truly believe it. You're just kind of like, credulous. And I think a lot of these people aren't necessarily outright lying, particularly when you come to these main figures, like there's certainly a lot of grifters and the people promoting the stories, but the main figures, people like Nolan and Grusch, and like I think they have these beliefs, and these beliefs go way back. There's always been a crew of people in the government, in the intelligence community, with an interest in the paranormal. The people have said many times, all roads go back to Hal Puthoff.
Yeah,
All roads go back to the 70s. These guys running remote viewing experiments and all this. And the funny thing is, all these guys are the same guys in UFOs now promoting this, disclosure narrative. It's the Eric Davises, the put-offs. The valet was involved with those SRR guys and whatnot back then. Even Uri Geller is, big into the UFOs now. It's like all the old school intel guys that used to be trying to kill goats with their minds and remote view stuff are the same dudes now that have, it's like they switched from that into a different area of the paranormal. They switched into the whole UFO game, but it all goes back. And I think all those guys back then truly believed, the stuff they believed. It's, they may be scientists, but they still have beliefs.
Absolutely. Well, and they that's something that we've talked about on this show before, is this merger of all the paranormal into a central singular mass. And you see that like with the paranormal Pentagon program that got mislabeled as a UFO program in the news, like Robert Bigelow, the property guy, billionaire in quotes, who knows what his actual net worth is exactly, but anyway, close with Harry Reid, the senator there, got like a no bid contract to do this paranormal investigation stuff. He believes, like Leslie Kean, who's written books about like, the afterlife and UFOs, like they believe that it's all like one thing. And it's interesting to get into like what exactly those philosophical implications are like in their minds. Like I've looked into this a fair bit, Jeff, about like what the heck do these people actually fundamentally believe, right? Like somebody like Hal Puthoff starts a investment company based on like, we're going to use psychic powers to like beat the market, and like it doesn't go well. But like he started, like, it's like, did he just start it to like make a cash grab at the start, or did he sincerely think that it would work? And like I am compelled to believe that he actually is drinking his own Kool-Aid.
Yeah, it's hard to tell with some of these guys because they're never really that direct about what they personally believe, right? Like,
right.
Like they talk about the work they do, but when it gets down to like the direct personal opinions about things, are kind of like vague and ambiguous about it. Yeah. But I can totally believe that Puthoff, believes all that kind of stuff. I briefly said hi to him in person once, but never actually really had a conversation with him.
Yeah, no Jesse Michaels. You haven't sat down for an extensive interview.
Yeah.
You have to get your video production skills up and get that YouTube channel going. Then you can apparently sit down with almost anybody if you're willing to accept anything they have to say without question.
Yeah, if you don't push back, if you adhere to the George Norrie method of coast to coast, where you don't push back against anything, and it's crazy.
Yeah. Now, the Earth here, Rachel mentions, like, if Puthoff was a plasma, he would make a great UFO. Now, like the plasma, like I saw on your show, like you guys were like joking, you'd be like, "Oh, we're talking about plasma. Let's bring in Campbell. He's a plasma guy or whatever." It's like, it is true. I talk about it a lot with this subject because of the stuff that I read in the declassified reports and stuff. But like, it comes up constantly, and maybe I'll do a show to this some point, like, as if people aren't like sick of it. But I actually have a bunch of information that I think people would find very fascinating about like the Sapphire Project. That's you're familiar with that, Jeff?
I'm drawing a blank. It sounds familiar, but
so Hal Puthoff, once again, and Eric Davis are among the co-founders back in the early 2000s. They started what's called the Sapphire Project, SAFFIRE. It was an attempt to produce fusion power through using the science around ball lightning. And that project was founded by Puthoff and Eric Davis shortly after Davis wrote a paper for the U.S. Air Force Research Labs called Ball Lightning Study, where it was classified, and John Greenwald got it declassified in 2019. Davis goes into detail about how ball lightning is this natural phenomenon with all of these remarkable features, all of the same features as classic UFOs. And he says that UFOs, fairies, all this stuff attributed historically are actually ball lightning. And he goes into how it's like a legitimate thing. He talks about how it can be weaponized, all this stuff. You're writing for the U.S. Air Force. And then he goes with Hal Puthoff, and they found a company, private company, where they're soliciting private investments. So there's no, financials being reported or anything, but they're using the basis that UFOs are actually plasma phenomena. And since we know UFOs are real, we know that the plasma phenomena actually can produce these self-contained things, and those can be used for fusion power, conservation of energy, all this crap. And they use that as the foundation of a company they start. And then publicly, Eric Davis is coming out saying, oh no, like UFOs are actually physical craft and there are retrievals and stuff like that. And then in private, he's writing papers for the US Air Force saying, oh no, UFOs are ball lightning. And he's co-founding companies trying to monetize ball lightning related technology, reverse engineering.
Ball light, yeah.
The same thing that the UK Ministry of Defense report says that they are doing with it. We recognize UFOs are ball lightning and we're trying to weaponize it. And we aren't going to talk about it publicly because we don't want the Russians to pick up on what we're doing. And it has all these remarkable features. So it's like that kind of thing where Davis is in public saying, oh, these are physical craft and they're aliens and they're coming here and they're crashing and we have crash recoveries of the aliens. And then he's writing a paper saying to the government that's classified, oh, no, all UFOs are actually these natural phenomena, and here are the ways that we can actually use them to benefit our national security. That, to me, is one of the most troubling things that I've seen in this entire subject, because it is so black and white to me that he knows what he is doing.
Yeah, Eric Davis says a lot of conflicting things at like different times. I believe even not that pretty recently, like there's quotes that people post on Twitter of him again talking about how like this is all paranormal, it's all the same thing, like ghosts, UFOs, etc., are all the same like kind of like phenomenon. Now that paper, are you sure that was only released in 2019? I'm pretty sure I had his ball lightning paper many years before that.
John Greenwald got it declassified in 2019. It could have been declassified by other. Yeah, I've got it on my web. I could pull it up quickly here, but like, yeah, it's
the weird thing about Davis is like he's probably a really smart guy, but most of his stuff is just his whole deal is in like hypothetical like physics, like that may or may not have any real practical use or be possible, like physically engineering, like it might not even be possible on these various things. And like Steve points out in the chat, like it's kind of like it's almost like a paper writing scam, right? These guys keep getting government contracts to write papers on, like obscure fringe, like kind of ideas and topics, like before OSAP, they were doing papers for the Air Force Research Lab. There's this teleportation one, I believe he did as well. It's like Eric Davis's whole career is basically just writing papers. Like he writes papers on speculative like physics. Like he was involved in the Frontiers of Propulsion Physics book, with I believe Mark Millis, who ran NASA's Breakthrough Propulsion Laboratory, kind of looking at all these theoretical like propulsion methods, like warp drive, like asymmetric capacitors, all these kind of like different kind of ideas. And he was involved in that. In fact, I actually attended Eric Davis's MUFON lecture on basically faster than light travel. I have a copy of it on DVD around here somewhere.
That's interesting.
So like his whole deal has just been kind of in writing papers and speculating on stuff. But
yes,
he's a interesting guy. But I thought Eric Davis couldn't lie. So what's going on?
Oh yeah, right.
So how can he be saying one thing here and another thing here if he's incapable of lying?
It's Thomas Jefferson or George Washington, right?
That always just tell a lie. When people say someone's incapable of lying, that's just like the dumbest thing like I've ever heard. Like, I'm sorry, everyone's capable of lying. There's no magic condition where somebody's incapable of like lying. Like
it reminds me of like the Bill O'Reilly thing. It's like, well, okay, maybe he's not lying. Like he believes anything he thinks is a fact. Like, okay, like I guess that's one way of living life.
And there's also just kind of not lying, but intentionally being misleading and manipulative in like your wordings and the statements you make. Like and that's kind of what spooks do, right? That's like the whole point of like these spooks is that like they're not necessarily lying to you, but the way they're presenting information to you is misleading, or they're leaving things out, or they're saying things that are like sort of true or maybe technically true, but like the message isn't right. Like, yeah, it's
well, it's like,
that's
yeah,
why I'm not looking to the government for answers. Like, and that's what's the weirdest thing about the UFO community is that like they're all looking for the government to disclose, while at the same time telling them the government's lying to them about everything, and they're not going to believe any of it. It's like they'll listen to the government, and the government again says what they want to hear. But if they don't, then it's just still all the cover up.
Yeah.
So the idea of disclosure, I've always thought is kind of goofy, and the way that these same kind of anti-government people like still look to the government for all their answers is kind of hilarious to me.
Yeah, at least they're like public facing reports, right? And it's like we have, I don't know, like to me, like disclosure happened in 2006 when the UK's definitive report got published. It's like having the CIA's conclusive report handed to the Joint Chief of Staff's top secret. Like we have that in our hands. It verifies most of the conspiracies. Like if they could be 100% wrong in their analysis, but we know for a fact they are conspiring to keep their interest in UFOs a secret because they're trying to weaponize it or whatever. That's what they think they're doing, and that's what they have on paper. It's been very thoroughly researched and verified by BBC News and The Guardian and Wired magazine. So like to me, that's disclosure. It's like, okay, we know what they think inside the government.
Yeah,
like,
and that's
okay.
it. That's it.
And it's boring. Nobody cares.
Yeah,
literally nobody cares about that report. Like I cannot get anybody to care about it because it's boring as hell. I can't get through that goddamn thing. It's so boring, Jeff. It's like it's about like plasma physics. It's like I have no interest. I mean, okay, indirectly now, but like I have no inherent interest in that kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like this is all indirectly through interest in like history and like the government and things like that. It's like disclosure. We'll find out, I guess, but whatever.
Well, and like you said, it depends on what you mean by disclosure. Like in a sense, disclosures happen in many places. A lot of countries have released all their UFO files. You know, like the UK. You know, like Brazil, Spain, etc. Like you can argue that they've disclosed like what they have. Unfortunately, like there's the government disclosing what they know, and then there's the disclosure people are looking for, and that's disclosure that they know about alien bodies and crafts and whatnot. And while the government absolutely keeps stuff secret and has issues with transparency, and I think when it comes to the UFO topic, they should be more transparent about some of this stuff. That does not mean they've got, to disclose what people want to hear. So you could argue, again, even in the US, like they've continued to like state, they don't have any evidence of ET crafts. They put out these reports, they're going to be putting out, like these historical studies and all this other stuff. Like, you could argue that's disclosure in a sense. It's just not the disclosure people are looking for, because when they think disclosure, they think alien spaceships and bodies and whatnot.
And that's kind of what it means at this point.
Yeah, it does. But even Valet has said before that like this idea of disclosure is kind of silly, because you're assuming the government has something to disclose to you that, what you're looking to hear, and they may not. Like, it's just as likely the government doesn't really know any more than most people about this stuff. Yeah. And again, like I say, it's not a singular phenomenon. There's not just like one answer for everything, so there's some cases they probably solve, they solve easily. There's other cases that just lack information that they can't solve, and they disclose what they can. But the lack of them not disclosing some stuff doesn't necessarily mean that it's also like that's the good stuff they don't want to tell us about. In most cases, that's just because they're protecting, like technology methods, sensors, sources, all this kind of stuff. Like, it's got nothing to, it's national security. It's not national security covering up alien spaceships. It's just standard, boring national security stuff like that they've always done.
It reminds me of the jet stream.
Yeah.
Right? Like the jet stream was top secret classified for a long time. And it's like, it makes me think of like, if you're an independent scientist outside of the government being like, no, this invisible river is in the atmosphere, I swear. And then, like, years later, it comes out that, like, oh yeah, the Japanese discovered it and we're using it to send those bombs across the ocean. It was top secret because of that. And then this research is like, I was telling you all it was real and you didn't believe me. And everyone's like, I don't care. Like,
he was an early UFO researcher, shouting into the wind, and
that's exactly how it. I think I suspect that's how this is going to go. But whatever, it's a fun, like, kind of. It's an interesting series of characters. There's it's worth. I like sticking around and sort of discussing what's going on with it. How they're all interrelated, challenging the narrative, and like, there's some side of me that's like, it would be pretty cool. Like, I grew up reading science fiction. Like, I was into all that.
Yeah.
Like, Ray Bradbury, Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, Greg Bear, all these guys. I was, like, super into all that stuff, and, like, it would be so awesome if that. I mean, terrifying, but also pretty cool if some element of it ended up being true. If we could verify that there's life outside of Earth, even in our solar system, that would be pretty remarkable to me. It'd be far more remarkable to me if we could somehow determine that it was even outside of our solar system. But I don't expect that to occur.
Yeah, and the same thing with me, right? Like I would love for that to happen. Like, I still kind of hope we get evidence someday that, extraterrestrial life. Like, I think it would be great if we ever got evidence that some UFOs are spaceships visiting us. Like, I don't necessarily believe that's the case, and I certainly don't think we have evidence for that. But I'm definitely open to that. Like,
you called it extraterrestrial light.
Life.
Oh, life. I think you were like ET light, like it's like just the like minimal, like the single cell organisms or something. It's that's ET light.
It's non-intelligent. Yeah.
That's not 120 proof ET.
Yeah, it's because, like you, I grew up with sci-fi. Like, I grew up, like, even when I first got into UFOs, I was more like this nuts and bolts kind of like ETH kind of guy, right? Like, but over the years, I've just became a lot more interested again in, like, the people in the community, like the narratives and the way that the community interacts with each other and the way information kind of gets spread through the community. And I've adopted a much more like psychosocial approach, like, to the phenomenon. But even still, I would love, to find out that there's alien life, whether that's just something we detect remotely with sensors or whether they visit us. Like, I'm certainly not afraid of it. Like, people accuse skeptics of being, like, oh, you're so afraid of the idea that there could be alien life that you're dismissive of all this. Like, not at all. Like, actually, I think that'd be awesome. That'd be great. Like, bring it on. Like,
well, I'm terrified of it, but, like, I want to know if it's happening. It's like, I want to know about the things I'm scared about. Like, it's like, I want to know if it's happening. Let's see. Okay, so Jeff, just have a question here from V. He's asking you, like, what your thoughts are about John Greenwald. He's been getting more and more conspiracy minded, from what I can see.
Yeah, like, I've always, like, had a lot of respect for John Greenwald because he's been doing the whole, like, FAOI thing for a very long time, getting all these records. Like, he's been involved with putting, like, the MUFON journals, that, like, the scans of those, like, that I use still have his banner on the top of them because he helped put them out. So he's done a lot of great work, and he's one of these guys that got into the topic young, kind of like I did, and has kind of, like, been involved with it for, like, his whole, most of his life there. But I will also say that I do kind of agree, because he's kind of lately got involved with some of these other characters like Chupacabra and, like, all those kind of guys, like that.
Really?
He did a spaces with these guys, and has seemed to kind of buy into some of their narrative, kind of against INS and, the UFO hate group and all this other stuff.
Oh God.
That there are things that he says that I'm just kind of also like, what the heck, man? Like, that's,
I guess he is a big fan of Friedman, right? Stanton Friedman. And obviously Stanton Friedman's had some questionable views, I would say.
Yeah, and again, I like Stanton Friedman as, like, a guy. Like,
he's hilarious. Like,
he was
such an entertaining speaker, right?
Yeah, but yeah, again, like, his work isn't really, like, the best out there, and that's like one of the most awful things you can say in the UFO community is like,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
got what'd you say about Stanton Friedman? Like,
Yeah.
he's got to be here forever. Like,
Yeah.
well, I mean, again, like I say, he's a cool guy, but he could also be quite credulous, and a lot of his work just wasn't very critical or good,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, not critical, there's no question.
yeah, but he was an absolutely great like showman and speaker. Like
Yes.
it probably kind of helps that he gave mostly the same lecture repeatedly several hundred times, over the years.
Yeah, you got it
But
enamored.
he really worked it down, and you can't go to a UFO conference now without somebody being able to recite his rules against debunkers, or that he would kind of always open up his lectures with, right? Like don't bother me with the facts. My mind's already made up. And
Yes, right. Yes,
those are
such
the
a
rules,
good
like,
it's a
and it's
good line. It is a
and
good
the funny
line.
thing is, like, those rules actually usually apply more to UFO believers than they do to skeptics. Like,
Yeah.
you could have just like wiped that out. But
Yeah, that is a bit of an eye like the facts, like, I mean, yeah, we don't have to
I'll
get into
say
that.
not just about Stanton, but just kind of UFO guys in general. Like, I find myself, I don't know if anybody else finds this, but like, there'll be guys that I followed the work for many years, and then I'll see them give a lecture somewhere, like at MUFON, and I just can't help but feel disappointed. Like this
Yeah.
guy, like you've seen the research for years, and then you actually see them in person, and you realize they're kind of a bit of a credulous dolt that believes all sorts of nonsense. And you're like, darn it, man, I liked
Yeah.
you. Like, and then I realized you're just. And sometimes I don't know if they're just kind of playing it up for the audience because they know the audience wants to hear all this like anti-skeptic, like bad
Mhm.
debunker, like and alien stuff. But a lot of times I think they actually believe that, and you don't necessarily see it in some of their work, but when you see them in person you realize they're more believer, less critical scientists than you actually like think they are.
Right.
As they say, don't meet your heroes. Yeah, don't meet your UFO heroes. You find out it's not that great.
Well, I don't know if Jesse Michaels would agree with you, Jeff.
Well,
He
yeah.
seems very taken. But yeah, I guess we shouldn't use him as a standard for anything.
Peter Thiel tech bro, Jesse Michaels. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm shocked that Luis never joined. I really assumed it was going to be similar to the previous time when he showed up after an hour. I am very happy with how this went, though, Jeff. It's been like really awesome having this conversation with you. You're extremely knowledgeable. Like, you can just recite all this information just right off the top of your head, and it's like names, dates, locations. It's like stunning, really. It's
This
been
is what you get for wasting your life on UFOs.
no, not a way. Like it's being you've been refining it and cultivating it for this moment, for these moments, Jeff. Like, it's now time to provide your wealth of knowledge to the universe, and cause everybody to realize what's going on here.
Well, I share a lot of information. It's just so sad that a lot of people dismiss a lot of stuff that I share and put out there
Mhm.
simply because I am a skeptical guy, right? Like I get written off as a debunker by a lot of like the community, even though that's not even like my approach. Like, do you
Yeah.
see me posting debunks of cases? No, like that's not really what I do. Like
No, I never
I
see
just
that.
post
Like,
historical information and let people kind of like look at it. But
yeah.
yeah, that's why I do what I do, trying to share some of the information that I've learned over the years, and the stuff I've collected, and
Hmm.
the never ending my Stanton Friedman like office here. Like, have you ever seen Stanton Friedman's office? Like a
No.
picture of him, like it was the most unorganized thing you've ever seen. Like it's like stacks of paper, like
Right.
all along everywhere. Like they showed a picture of him sitting in a chair, right? And he's just like kind of like it looks almost like a hoarder's like house, right? Like just
Yeah.
surrounded like papers and like books and stuff. Like
Yeah.
that's how this gets to be after a while. Like I
Right.
got like stacks over here, like UFO papers and just all this material that I try and share with people and do what I can to educate people. So
Well, it's amazing. Yeah, I really appreciate it, and I know that a lot of other people do. And I want to point out too, like the way that you sort of let like the negativity in the community sort of like roll off your back, like duck with water or whatever. Like it's admirable. Like you don't like take the bait, right? Like you sort of are just like a solid, steady force in the community, and I know a lot of people appreciate that.
Well, thank
So
you.
yeah, no problem. Yeah, so Jeff, just let everybody know, where can they follow your stuff, like the daily UFO in history posts and things like that. What's your tag, Twitter?
You can just follow me on Twitter at Mr. Jeff Knox. I also do it on Facebook if you want to look up my name, Jeff Knox. And hopefully sometime in the near future here, I want to try to start doing it kind of like in a blog or a database as well. So it's not just on social media, or even potentially I've got an idea of creating PDFs for all the posts I do. So you could just download a case file PDF with all the documents and stuff in it.
Oh, nice. Like downloading your Twitter archive or whatever the heck it is. And
that way. Yeah. Cause I've been doing it for over a year now, and it amounts to something like 16,000 like images of pages, and something like 1,000 something pages of text, for the text parts of the post. And
it could be a book. Honestly, you're making me think that would be pretty cool. Like one of those like old Far Side. Did you ever have those? I used to get those every year, like the cartoon calendar where you pull one off every day.
That's actually something I've been wanting to do for a while now.
Nice,
like a calendar, like a desk calendar that you could pull off each day, and each day has like a little case on it.
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah, exactly.
That's something that's been in my plans. I just hadn't had time to put it together, because like for the first year I've been doing this, like I work on these cases pretty much like from when I wake up to when I go to bed. Like
it's a huge amount of work.
A good 8 to 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, just like on my case post. So now that I've got over a year done, I'm still kind of wrapping up like a last month of, like when I first started doing it, I didn't actually keep records. I just kind of did it all like live. Like I did it in real time when I would do my posts. Like now I prepare ahead of time. So once I get that wrapped up, I plan to start really working on like a calendar and like a website and whatnot to make this information available in other ways. I want to make an adult coloring book too, if I can find somebody that can draw.
Oh wow. I like a UFO adult coloring book, like with cases, like the different flying saucers and stuff.
So you can color in the case illustration and learn about the case over here. Like
that's cool.
I think that would be great, because
I love that idea.
Because that's what I would do at UFO conferences. Like if you ever saw me at a UFO conference, I'd have an adult coloring book and my bag of markers with me, and I'd be coloring while I'm listening to the lecture, because I have sleeping disorders, so I'll fall asleep. Like if you just sit me in a chair, like in front of a screen, like, so I've got to keep myself doing something else at the same time. So I would color, figure, hey, why not making a UFO adult coloring book?
Yeah, that would be perfect. Actually,
that's also educating people, with the material. So.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love both those ideas. I would support wholly moving those concepts forward. That's awesome. Okay, and I guess we'll wrap it up. Unfortunately, Louis never joined us.
Hopefully he's okay.
Oh, I'm sure he is. He just, it's just his way.
He likes to show up last second on our show as well.
Yeah.
We'll say we're meeting a half hour before, and he'll come in like, 1 minute. So,
He's just he's a busy guy, or he likes to keep us guessing. But
not everyone can be around working on UFOs like I am or something.
No, maybe it's good.
Some people have lives, apparently.
Yeah, I guess we can't fault them for that.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks so much for joining. It's been a lot of fun, and I've been really enjoying following the chat when I can. I've been a little bit distracted just with the interesting conversation we've been having, but I've been really liking what we've been seeing, and hopefully we can keep this thing going. Let's talk to Luis, and hopefully we can get it going next week, ideally, if not sometime soon. And I guess that's pretty much it, everybody. I'm obviously at UAP Study on Twitter, or X. I'm sorry, Elon, obviously watching right now. And my website, uapstudy.com. Check it out, everybody. All right, now let's go to the closer. See you, everybody.
See ya.